Train the muscles, not the joints.
Welcome back to Natural Land Bodybuilding Mountain. And today I'm going to be doing another workout vlog with you guys. So I'm going to start with some flat dumbbell press. And lately I've been going back and forth between flat bench and incline bench. But usually I'm doing barbell for the flat and dumbbell for the incline. And of course the incline flies, as you guys know, right? But one thing I want to say is that a lot of times guys on the internet will say weird things, like they'll say don't do flat bench because your boobs will droop and all that kind of shit. Like your pecs will look like droopy. And the truth is that the flat bench has been a staple for bodybuilders for a long time for a reason. I mean, it doesn't make your pecs droopy. It just makes you have bigger pecs. That's it, you know? Assuming, of course, that seems to stimulate your pecs anyway, based on your bodily dimensions and so forth. But flat bench is still a staple, regardless of what people say. You know, people just make shit up. You know what I'm saying? Like they'll see some guy with a fat physique and then say, "Oh, it must have been those bench presses or something." No, it's usually because the guy's got too much body fat. That's what made his pecs droop. You know what I'm saying? So I understand the value of an upper chest. I understand the value of having a balanced physique. But just because inclines are great doesn't mean flat is useless, right? So it's always about the time and place that you use an exercise and why you're using it. But I find that stimulating the muscle from many different angles is a great strategy in order to get overall development. So, you know, sometimes I'll do flat dumbbell press. I'll do flat barbell press. I'll do incline barbell, incline dumbbell. Of course, here I can't do incline barbell very well just because just the way my squat rack is set up and the bars there. And then there's this little lip on my incline bench that kind of interferes with that bar, so I can't get the bench in the right position or whatever. But when I go to the gym, and I haven't been to a public gym in a while, but when I do go to the gym, I do barbell inclines from time to time as well. So I like to rotate them around. Each exercise will stimulate you in different ways. And so there's always something to be gained from each thing, which is, you know, why I like variety, right? Variety is the spice of life, they say. So I think it really does apply when it comes down to bodybuilding. It's really great to mess around with different angles, because when you do, you start to make these weird discoveries, like I said before. Sometimes you assume a lot about an exercise until you do it, and then you're like, oh shit, this is doing something totally different than I expected. So it's always worthwhile to change up your angles and experiment, not just stick to the same thing over and over again for 20 years. You know, so sometimes people stick to something and then just because it's worked, they just do that same thing. And that's all great, but you know, innovation is sometimes also part of this process as well. It's not always about just doing the same thing over and over again, you know. So yeah, let's start with some flat bench. I'm going to do 70-pound dumbbells. And yeah, then move up from there. I don't know how heavy I'm gonna go, but we'll see. It's amazing that once you do a movement that you haven't done for a while, even a few weeks, like I haven't done flat dumbbell presses for a few weeks because I've been busy doing the incline dumbbell presses and the flat barbell bench. But yeah, just you do it and you realize why you're using a different variation of the movement, because it does feel different. And you notice that you just hit different fibers in the chest or more of the chest in certain circumstances. So when I'm bench pressing, I'm hitting the chest hard as well, but through certain ranges. But with the dumbbell press, it feels like I hit the chest in just a different way and just as intense, if not more intense, in different ways. So the mistake a lot of people make is that then they become, well, let's just say they become monogamous with their exercises, right? they start to say, oh wow, you know, I feel this exercise more, or at least it feels different, so it must be better. And then they just stick with that one exercise, and then they lose the variety in their training. And I find that keeping variety in your training, you know, and you could be exclusive with one exercise for a period of time, like maybe 3 weeks or a couple months, like whatever, you can do that. But don't forget about these other exercises, because sometimes they're working on different weak links or different aspects of the muscle, or different, you know, stabilizers are involved, right? Different, I don't know the right word, not torque curve, but there's just different parts of the curve in which the muscles are stimulated efficiently. So that's why I find myself coming back to old exercises, and that's why I don't just stick to one. You know, some guys are just exclusive bench pressers, that's all they ever do, or maybe they just do dumbbells, they give up barbell altogether. You know, if there's injury reasons for that, then I'm on board with you. But I do think you're missing out if you stick to one exercise because you just like it more, and you're giving up variety just because you don't want to do something different, you know? So I do notice that variety is really helpful. And sometimes when you don't do an exercise for a period of time and you go back to it, you start to realize why it's also necessary to include a little bit of variety in how you're training. So yeah, you don't have to be married to one exercise, you know what I'm saying? It's you could play the field a bit, you know what I mean? Hey, you could be a bachelor forever with your exercises. You don't have to get married to one exercise. That's my point. All right, let's go to the hundreds. Now here's something interesting. As I warmed up with the 70-pound dumbbells, felt pretty good, but I noticed that my front delts feel tight today. I have no idea why. I mean, I did some heavier squats yesterday, and I did some Romanian deadlifts, and then I was doing some front raises the day before. So sometimes when you do a different movement, even if you're doing it light, sometimes it can fatigue different parts or different areas than you're used to, and sometimes that carries over into other workouts. Now, what I do is I don't worry about it, right? I mean, a lot of guys, they'd be worried about it. They're like, oh yeah, I lost a few reps on my bench. That means I should discard anything unless I'm always getting the peak amount of reps at every single time. But what I do is I bring an enlightened approach to it. I say, what is happening? Let's not worry about the whys right now. What is happening, and what can I do about it in this moment to ensure that I'm staying in one piece, I'm getting a decent workout. And you'll notice that when you take your ego out of the decision-making process, you'll realize there's no problem, right? You'll say, oh geez, you know, just the delts are sore today. The front delts are a bit sore. I won't go quite as heavy on the dumbbell bench. I'll just stick to the 100s instead of going to the 120s. And I'll just rep out from there and have a great workout, get a good pump, and everything's happy. You know, what's the problem with dwelling on it? And then what you'll notice is that when you pay attention to your body this way, you not only avoid injuries or avoid tweaking something, but you also free yourself from misery, you know? I remember back in the day, I used to be miserable in some workouts because I was not quite as strong, or I was like obsessing about whether I'm getting stronger every workout or not. I don't obsess about that anymore. You know, like I haven't obsessed about it for 20 something years, you know? What I do is I just work as hard as my body lets me work that day, and get the required stimulation, and just realize that there's a very strong possibility that maybe I've done something in the last few days that caused the front delts to be sore that I just didn't take into account in my decision-making process when I decide what to do today. But in the end, you're here to stimulate. It's not about breaking records every single workout. I mean, you're gonna break some records, don't get me wrong, but you don't have to break a record in order to stimulate the muscle. Hey? Huh? So an interesting thing is the second set of the 105s felt better, like somehow everything adjusted and stuff. So another point I want to make with you is that sometimes when you're training, the first working set might feel a little awkward. And if you're driven by your ego, sometimes you'll be like, okay, it feels awkward, but I'm going to push through anyway. I'm going to go to that heavier weight. But I'd say it's not a bad idea to stay at the same weight until everything feels perfectly stable and good. And only when that happens do you move up in weight. Now, I understand there's always the people on the internet that are saying, oh yeah, you got to conserve your energy. Don't waste it in too many warm-ups. But again, how useful is that advice if you're tearing or pulling something? Right? Because your training's going to go out the door. So you're better off making sure the groove is good. Now today, I think what happened was my last bench press workout, I didn't flare the elbows because I tell you guys all the time, don't flare the elbows on bench. You know, don't bring the elbows up here, especially if you're using decently heavy weight. If you want to do it with super lightweight, that's fine. But once you get into heavier weight, it's a bit of a risky maneuver. But what I did was I didn't tuck the elbows as much as I usually do. And that just made my muscles sore in a different way. I started to activate the front delts in a different way. And, you know, because I have unstable shoulders, it actually causes them to sit differently in the joint sometimes. So anytime you make a small adjustment to an exercise, you're going to learn something because you're going to see how just one adjustment, just one small adjustment will stimulate the muscle in a different way or different muscles altogether, even though you're supposedly doing the same exercise. So that's why it's really important when you do something like bench presses or squats or whatever, just understand that any variation you do in that exercise will change what gets stimulated. And I find a lot of people, they will put an exercise into a category and just say, okay, I'll check that off the list. I work my muscles a certain way, but you can also experiment, and this comes back to that whole variety thing. You can experiment with doing exercises differently. You know, when you're doing really heavy weight, you know, you want to tuck the elbows a little bit more because it's safer when you're doing bench presses, for instance. But if you're using lighter weight and you want to focus on really getting more stimulation on the pecs, maybe you bring the elbows up a little bit. Maybe you go more straight up and down instead of the arcing motion. Maybe you experiment with that. And that's okay. There's not really one fast rule of how to do the exercise. There's just a rule when it comes down to what's the safest way to do it, especially when you're using, you know, reps of 6 or lower, right? But when you're playing around with higher reps, you can play around also with the form, and the lighter the weight, the more creative you can get with the form, right? And that comes back to another thing that I say a lot is vary the rep ranges. This is another reason why you want to do that, because by varying up the rep ranges, you know, sometimes you do higher reps, sometimes you do lower reps, you will be free to experiment with the exercises in a way that allows you to stimulate them safely, right? Because you can get more creative. You can flare the elbows a little bit when you're doing bench presses if you're using lighter weight, right? Assuming it doesn't hurt your shoulders. But if you feel it more in the pecs, I would say once you're doing 25, 30 reps, you know, at a moderate speed, not super fast, it'd probably be pretty safe on the pec tendons. But once you start getting into 15 reps, 10 reps, 5 reps, now you want to bring those elbows down a little bit to accommodate that extra stress on the pec tendons, right? But, you know, like I said, there's no right way. There's just the safer way, depending on the weights that you're using. You guys really should be sending me about $499,995 for this advice, because this stuff is gold. It's absolute gold. So it's pretty good. So I did 3 sets so far. I'm gonna do one more, and then I'm gonna move on to some back. But one thing I want to say is that lately I've been doing a higher fat, higher protein diet, or, you know, moderate protein, like 200 grams, 220 grams, you know, 240, 200, you know, grams of protein a day or so. And then I have about 9 or 10 egg yolks a day, and then I'll eat some beef or some chicken and so forth. And I was having about 1 carb meal a day, some oatmeal in the morning, and then basically more fat and protein for the rest of the day. Now I start to notice, and this is normal, I start to notice that my strength drops off a bit, and also you start to flatten out, right? Like I noticed that my physique starts to flatten out quite a bit, and you're not as pumpy and lumpy for a little bit. And then once I start to notice that my strength drops back too much, then I'll start to add some more carbs. So anyway, the reason why I sometimes will do this with my diet is to help skim off a little bit of body fat, but also to make sure that my body is also more receptive to carbohydrates, right? So I'm trying to reset the insulin sensitivity. So I started doing this back in the day because I realized that when I was doing a lower carb diet, I would shred off body fat, but then there was a point to where then my body would start to fight me, and it would start to lose muscle and look shittier. Like I would look fatter and flatter, right? So I noticed that by increasing the carbs for a few days and then lowering them down a bit more for a few days, I started to get the best of both worlds. So with a standard natural bodybuilding competition, you have to get ready for a Saturday bodybuilding show. And so every week what I would do is that I would do a low carb, you know, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and then I would start carbing up on Wednesday and Thursday, and then I do a lower carb day on Friday, and then see what I look like on Saturday. And I started to play around with the different days of the week and find out where the sweet spot was, how much or how many days should I eat as much carbs as I want with my protein meals, and see what I look like. So long story short, I came to the realization that if I carved up on Tuesday and Wednesday and then started to pull back the carbs on Thursday and Friday, I looked perfect, or much better anyway, on Saturday, as opposed to me going low carb all the time. Because the problem is when you carb up before a competition, you'll actually retain a bit of water. So when I spent a day or two pulling back the intake of carbohydrates, I started to drain off a little bit of water. So I'd maintain my fullness, but at the same time not retain the water on stage. So I'd look better under the lights and in competition. So it took me a while to refine that, but that was basically what I learned. So what I'm doing now is I'm basically trying to find the happy medium where I'm getting in more fat in my diet because I want the fat-soluble vitamins and minerals to obviously be absorbed by my body, and you need fat for that. So I'm trying to make sure that I have more fat, but a happy medium of it. I don't want to become a fat bastard, obviously, but I want to have enough fat that my body's healthy. And the way to offset that extra fat intake is to lower the carbs a tiny bit, right? But obviously, if you lower them too low, you're going to lose strength, you're going to lose muscle, and also you're going to look a little bit shitty. So that's why I'm trying to find that happy medium right now. So now I'm adding carbs to every meal again. I went through 3 or 4 days where I was basically lowering them down, and I'm starting to feel better. But I also noticed that my strength came down a little bit with some of the upper body exercises from dropping the carbs a bit. So you know that if you're trying to lose body fat, but you drop strength too fast, then there's a possibility that you should probably raise up that energy food a bit more. Like maybe you need a bit more carbohydrates, because you don't want to be dropping strength like crazy. Because if you are, then you're probably dropping muscle too, and that's the last thing you want when you're trying to cut. So yeah, I'm not really trying to cut. I'm just trying to find the happy medium where I can lean out a little bit, but also maintain as much muscle mass as possible and as much health as possible. That's really my point. Mountain. So yeah, I'm feeling pretty pumped because I've been having the carbs now and stuff, but The one thing about carbohydrates that I think a lot of people make a mistake with, and I've made that mistake too, is that they assume that carbs are bad, right? And carbohydrates are bad. Certain fats, they're just bad, like saturated fat's bad. And of course that's not true, right? But too much is bad if you want to drop body fat, or if you want to maintain the same body fat level. Say if you have too much, then you'll start to put on body fat. So the point is that you want to have enough carbohydrates that your muscles are full of glycogen, but you don't want to have so much carbohydrates that it starts to spill over and then your body starts to store the stuff as body fat. So carbohydrates aren't the problem. It's just the amount and the dose per meal that you're having can be the problem. But if you're adding carbohydrates to your protein meals throughout the day, you should be fine as long as you're not having too big of portions. And again, this is going to be based on your own individual situation. So if you're noticing that you're putting on body fat, maybe don't cut carbohydrates out altogether, but just lower down the portions, or at least make the portions a bit smaller and increase the protein, and then see what happens, instead of just throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Because the thing is, carbohydrates help you maintain muscle. They also help you maintain intensity, and they also make the muscle look a hell of a lot better. So some of you guys will notice that some of the videos I'll look a bit flatter, and then some will look a bit more pumped. Well, the difference is carbohydrates. So when I started to cut carbs a bit, I cut them a bit too much because I was trying to experiment where that threshold was. And then I start to flatten out a bit. So it's normal for you to kind of go through this learning curve. But in the end, if you're flattening out so much, sometimes you are at risk of losing muscle mass in the process, right? So, and if you're not trying to get down to 4% body fat, there's no point. There's no point in getting rid of muscle like that. Sometimes it's necessary for bodybuilders that are trying to get so lean that they have to sacrifice some muscle. But if you're a hobbyist like I am now, I'm not competing right now. I'm just trying to find the diet that's perfect for maintaining as much muscle mass as possible and as much recovery and health. And then secondarily, or fourthly, four, 1, 2, 3, four, yeah. On the fourth thing, I'm trying to basically make sure that I can cut a bit of body fat in the process in case I feel like I'm getting a little bit too chunky. You know what I'm saying? Nobody wants a marshmallow walking around, Yeah, that said, don't eat marshmallows if you want to cut body fat. Don't do that. So yeah, so that's my chest workout. Now I'm going to do a little bit of biceps. I'm going to do the hybrid incline curl like I taught you guys a few videos ago. I'm going to do this hybrid incline curl. And for you purists out there, it's not necessarily an incline, but it's more like straight up and down, but allows a bit of a freedom of the movement in the body for me to activate that bicep brachii, and it just feels good. Again, sometimes exercises that just feel right, they might not look the prettiest, but if they feel right, sometimes you're on the right track. And I've been at this game for so long that I know when something feels a certain way, that it leads to growth, right? You'll start to put this together at some point. You'll start to realize certain sensations precede muscular growth. And once you learn that, man, I tell you, it's like the gates of heaven open up for you with bodybuilding gains, because you can really tell right then and there whether an exercise is really good for you or not, or whether it's going to produce gains or not for you, just based on the sensation. So that's what I'm trying to lead you guys into, is enough awareness that you start to be able to calibrate with this sensation, and then that sensation guides you to what is the perfect exercise, range of motion, rep range, and basically it'll guide you right to your gains. So it's like Jedi powers for natural bodybuilding. I'm filming this on May the 3rd, so maybe I'm tapping into the Jedi stuff. You're welcome. So if you guys haven't tried this form of the incline bicep curl, I highly recommend you try it. I know it seems like almost counterintuitive, but like I said, you're leaning back a little bit. You can change the angle as you go through the set. So say you want to contract the bicep first, like being more straight up and down, and then you can slowly start leaning back and actually start to stretch out the bicep. So it's like a individual pump and stretch sort of principle, where you pump the muscle up and then you slowly stretch it as you go. You start to stretch more and more as you go through the set. So it's kind of an interesting approach. But this comes back to what I said before, is that variation in how you do a specific exercise can make all the difference in the world. Because I've seen lots of people do exercises that are supposedly the same as somebody else, like say a tricep press down, but get little or very little results, comparatively speaking, to somebody else who just changed the exercise just slightly, or brought the elbows in, bring the elbows forward, you know, just making subtle adjustments to really concentrate that stress on the tricep. They would get more development. And it was the same with the incline curls. Like when I had a good shoulder, you know, before I dislocated this one, I used to rotate the arms out a little bit, and I get even more bicep brachii development from it because it would take the front delts right out of the movement. So sometimes just subtle adjustments, whether it's rotating the arm out or not, or whether it's leaning back a little bit, you know, just little adjustments like that can make all the difference in the world for intensifying the stress on the muscle belly. And that's really what you want. The more stress and more intensity that you can get on that muscle belly, basically making sure that this is what hits failure first, and that's what stops the set instead of something else, then you're going to get development in that area. So always remember that. Remember, whatever it is that's hitting failure, whatever it is that's causing you to stop the set, that is really what you're stimulating the most. And if that's agreeable to you, great. But if it's not, if you're hitting the wrong muscle, then that means you need to adjust the technique, the weight, the range of motion, or the exercise altogether. So that's a really helpful tip I just gave you there. Most of the time I find myself sticking to around 20 to 30 reps for bicep curls, but it depends on the day. Like sometimes I will go heavy. I'll do the 10 to 15 reps or 20 reps. Sometimes I'll even do 6 to 8 reps, but I find that's a little bit too hard on the tendon sometimes. And I noticed that most of my bicep gains came from 10 reps and above. And I've talked about this before, but isolation movements, it's usually a better idea to stay with medium to higher rep ranges instead of going into the supposed strength phases, like 5 reps or so. And I got stronger with bicep curls. Before the hockey injuries, like, you know, when I dislocated the shoulder and stuff, because that changes the dynamics. I know it's hard to understand if you don't have a dislocated shoulder, but the problem is my bicep has to stabilize the shoulder. And because of this torn rotator cuff, again from hockey, this bicep also has to do the same thing. So it's changed the dynamics around my bicep training quite a bit since I was competing, right? When I was competing, I didn't have the dislocating shoulder issue. So basically when you're doing heavy weights, like super heavy for arm curls, it's a bit more of a risk if you have an unstable joint. So if you guys have, like, say, an ACL tear in your knee, or, you know, some sort of weird ligament thing going on, don't be surprised if you have to use a little bit higher rep ranges. There's nothing wrong with that. It just means that your muscle's getting adequately stimulated without having to use quite as much weight. But still, I noticed that for the most part, biceps respond 10 reps and above. You don't have to go into the 5 rep range, like most people don't. But again, this is going to boil down to your own personal experience and your own genetics and so forth. But I've noticed that. So with these curls, I'm doing a little bit heavier. I'm doing 40 pounders. And you know, I do notice that it's good to still go heavier from time to time to challenge the bicep, and then other workouts you'll basically pump out the reps, right? So again, I'm not exclusive with heavyweight or lightweight. I believe that combining the two creates a synergy, and so I'll have lighter workouts and then I'll have heavier workouts, and in the end it leads to greater gains. Mountain. So remember, play around with the variations of an exercise. Just don't take the exercise at face value where you just assume, hey, I'm already doing this exercise properly and I'm just not getting results from it. Sometimes you need to adjust the grip, the angle of attack, or the weight, range of motion, and so forth. And by doing so, you'll find your own specific signature way of doing the exercise that gets the best gains from your bodily dimensions. Because a lot of people, they underestimate the role that their own tendon insertions and joint structures play in this entire bodybuilding game. But once you start to embrace that these are factors that you have to take into account, then you stop training like a robot and training the exact same everybody else does. You start to, find out like which variation of what movement allows you to feel the focus on the muscle you're trying to target. And at the same time, realize that it's okay to have many different variations or ways that you perform a certain exercise, because each variation is going to elicit a different result or a synergistic type result once you start to combining the different variations. And lastly, remember, variety is key. Variety really makes a difference in stimulating the muscle from as many different angles as possible and therefore getting more results in the long run. So yeah, that's something to take with you. But yeah, I'm going to finish up here and I'm going to go do some back, and then I'm going to start editing, because that's what I do now. I'm just constantly editing these longer format videos. They take quite a bit longer to edit. So thanks a lot, guys, for your patience. Thanks for tuning in. And yeah, make sure you shoot some comments down below and some questions and whatever, and I'll try to answer them in the next video. Mountain.